So today we are going to be discussing finding the x and y intercepts of a linear function. The first thing I must remind you guys is the x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis over here. And the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So one thing I must note, we are going to be using just the, we're just going to be using linear equations today. If you want to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept, all you have to do is look at where it is on the graph if given a graph. But today we're going to be looking at it through the scope of having just a linear equation. So let's start with our first example of how to find the x-intercept. That's where we're going to start. We're going to find our x-intercept, then we're going to find our y-intercept. So let's start with our first equation. And just a quick reminder, a linear function has one y to the first power and x to the first power. If it has either of those to a different power, it is not a linear function, and linear functions always create straight lines. So we're going to start here. Now the first thing we're going to do is find the x-intercept. So let's start with the x-intercept. I'm going to get rid of the y. Let's start with our x-intercept. To find the x-intercept, it has to cross the x-axis. If it crosses the x-axis, our y value is 0, because on the y-axis, the x-axis is 0. So we're going to plug in 0 for our y. And then all we have to do is solve for our x value. Now we will write these as points because they are points. And we'll come back to that in a second, but we're going to start off with this. So first off, I know that 0 minus 1 is negative 1. And I need to get this x by itself. So if I need to get this x by itself, what I'm going to do is subtract 2 from both sides. Remember, you always do the inverse operation to solve. So we are adding 2, we are going to subtract 2. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. So our x-intercept is going to cross where x equals negative 3. Now we are going to have to write this as a point. We know that our y value is 0 because we plugged in 0. So if we're going to write our point, which we know is our x comma y, we know our x value is negative 3 and our y value is 0. This is our x-intercept. Okay? Now we are going to find our y-intercept. So the x-intercept, you plug in 0 for y. Let's write that down. X-intercept, plug 0 in for y, and solve for x. That is our x-intercept. We are going to solve for our y-intercept now. So we just solved for our x-intercept. We know it is negative 3. I'm going to erase that. We don't need our graph anymore. To find the y-intercept, you're going to do the exact opposite. We are actually going to plug in 0 for x. So for y-intercept, we're going to plug 0 in for x and solve for y. So this time, again, we're going to use the same formula. We have y minus 1 equals. This time our x value is going to be 0 plus 2. We still need to get y by itself. Well, 0 plus 2 is just a positive 2. And we have negative 1 in y. Y is subtracting 1. We need to move the 1 to the other side. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to add 1. Those ones are going to cancel out, giving me y equals, and then 2 plus 1 is 3. So our y is going to cross, it's going to cross our y-axis where y is equal to 3. Now remember, on a standard graph, the y-axis, wherever that is, x is 0. So that is going to help us with our point. We're going to use the same thing, the y-intercept. Well, we plugged in 0 for x, so our x value is going to be 0, and our y value is the number that we solved for, or 3. So we have our x-intercept and our y-intercept. Let's do a few more examples. And then you guys can work on your worksheet for today. Okay, so for this one, let's solve for our x-intercept first. The first thing we're going to do is plug in 0 for x. For y. If we're trying to find our x-intercept, we plug in 0 for y. So we're going to solve for our x-intercept. So let's start. Our x-intercept, we plug in 0 for y. So 0 equals 5 halves x plus 3. We need to get this x term by itself. So what I need to do is move the 3 over. The 3 is adding, I'm going to subtract. If I subtract 3 from both sides, those 3's cancel out, leaving me with negative 3 equals 5 over 2x. Now, I hate working with fractions. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to get rid of my denominator. Remember, a fraction just means dividing. So we are going to have to get rid of our denominator. The denominator is dividing, the numerator is multiplying. This 2 is dividing our x. To get rid of the 2, we have to do the opposite of division. We're going to multiply both sides by 2. These 2's are going to cancel out. Give me negative 6 equals 5x. We still need to solve for our x value. The 5 is multiplying. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to divide. You can divide by 5. Well, negative 6 divided by 5 is just going to be negative 6 over 5. And 5 divided by 5 is 1. So it gives us x is equal to negative 6 over 5. Now remember, we have to write this as a point. Always write this as a point. So for this one, we have negative 6 over 5 as our x value. And x and our points are always written as x, comma, y. So we're going to start off with negative 6. Negative 6 fifths. And our y, we plugged in 0, so our y will be 0. This is the x-intercept. That is our x-intercept. We still need to find our y-intercept. We'll start there now. The y-intercept. We're going to use the same formula. We have y equals 5 halves x plus 3. This time we plug in 0 for our x value. We're going to plug in 0. That gives us 5 halves times 0 plus 3 is equal to y. 5 halves times 0 is 0 plus 3. Y is going to equal 3. So remember to write this as a point. You put 0, comma 3.